and welcome to the Two Gals and a Mic podcast. I'm your host, Sue Curver, and on today's show, I'm sitting down with resiliency expert Lorca Smetana, who is no stranger to danger and has spent her life dedicated to helping others recover and sustain life and health after crisis, change, and burnout. Lorca, welcome to the show.
I'm so glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. I introduced you as someone who is no stranger to danger. At a young age, you had a life altering experience, which was very formative in how you have chosen to craft your life and your purpose. Tell us about this and how it has allowed you to create a body of work that is specific to resilience.
I was raised by a climber and a mountaineer, and our family spent a lot of time in the mountains. When I reached high school, I was part of our school climbing team, and we had a climbing program in our school where we climbed Mount Hood in Oregon. This happened every year for many, many years. And in a trip up in May, we were hit by a storm. And I was the last person to turn down before the storm actually got hit. And I waited down below while all the rest of my companions were on the mountain and trapped. By the time we found them all, after a massive mobilization of humans, we ended up losing 9 people, 2 instructors and 7 of my fellow students. And this was a radical invitation to look at what I had in myself to be with hard things.
You're 16 years old, and I can't imagine that you had, or maybe you did, a lot of coping strategies already in place. You said that this is a radical invitation to look inward and to look at yourself. Practically speaking, what did that look like?
I was phenomenally fortunate to not have to look only inward, that I never didn't feel beautifully supported from outside as well. That I was part of a small, intimate school, that we were all in this together, that there was a great deal of love among all of us. And that went for staff and teachers and leadership and dorm leaders and students. And I was never alone. And then I had an additional benefit, which a lot of people didn't have. Climbing wasn't known the way it is today. There was a lot of misunderstandings and assumptions in the general public about why would we even be taking risks in the first place? Why would we invite young people to learn skills that are potentially life-threatening? And I was raised in a community that valued those things. My father, my father's climbing partners, my mother in different ways. And so for me, it was never wrong that we were out there in the first place. And I found a great deal of worth in that. At the same time, when something hurts that much, your nervous system is telling you, you can't ever do this to me again. You have to stop this at once and protect yourself completely, or you will break into a million little pieces. And that was a really interesting thing, because if I follow that through logically, I ask myself, are you going to stop climbing? And the answer is, well, no, that's not actually going to keep me safe from everything in the world. And 2, are you going to stop loving? Because that's at the heart of it. When you love, you are both simultaneously at greater risk of losing and protected in greater and more magical ways than you could be if you tried to stop being connected to people and stop loving. So that was an unexpected twist. And it all resulted in a massive amount of curiosity on my part, saying, okay, if I'm in a world of danger, if anything could happen to me again, I'm not immune now just because one big thing happened. Are there people out there who are better at this than others? And what are they like? And what do they do? And what do they not do? And what do they focus on? And what do they ignore? And how do people like this prioritize their life differently? How do they make themselves beautifully strong and wide and deep so that they can hold both good and bad in themselves without dissolving? I really wanted to be one of those people. And so I started collecting what I call a toolbox of anything that was relevant to those questions. And that's everything that I work with now, teaching and learning and playing and living.
Let's talk about this a little bit, Lorca. You made at a very young age a pivotal decision to continue to expose yourself to things, maybe perceived threats or other things that could cause you harm. right? You intentionally decided to continue on that journey with a sense of, as you've just said, curiosity. And we see that we're living in a different time now where taking risks is maybe not as negatively perceived as it was at the time when you were on Mount Hood, which, when we think about our veteran community, our first responder communities, and people who have just navigated through COVID, we're learning that resiliency is an important topic for a lot of communities and a lot of people. What does it mean? What is resiliency and why is it so important?
I don't think it's wrong to say that I believe in resilience above everything else. When I say resilience, my definition of that is that it is a capacity. Maybe even you could call it a currency of life energy. It's what you meet the world with. Some of what the world comes to you with, you can affect, and a large amount of it, in fact, much more than we even probably think, you can't. And therefore, if I try to concentrate my energy on controlling the circumstances, then I am going to burn out just from that alone. But instead, if I ask myself, how can I become extraordinary at refilling? If I am pouring out energy and attention and time and resources, as we do in the world, that's what we want. We all want to give. We want to heal. We want to fix and work and invent. And that's where the richest parts of our lives are. If it's true that we want to give, then the beautifully responsible, moral, deeply alive way to be in the world is to be someone who is phenomenal at regenerating and refilling so that you get to give regardless of circumstances through time, that you maintain integrity, even in the face of what other people might see as phenomenal giving. That is a unique quest. What refills me won't refill you. What refills and restores one organization or one company or one agency, they need to figure that out for themselves and work to be supported in developing real clarity around this. Because I believe that when something matters to you, whether as a parent or because you have a mission or because you are building something extraordinary, then you commit to it through time. Not just this coming year, but 5 years down the road and 10 years down the road, and however long this thing matters. And if you are not building this extension through time, and that not just that you'll be around, but that you'll have vitality at that point, that's an astonishing form of leadership. If you're like that, then it's also equally in your interest to promote resilience in everybody that touches you. And the more resilient you are, the more you naturally do that.
You mentioned that it really is an individual thing, and what works for one person may not work for another person when it comes to pouring inward, refilling, and regenerating. Do
Yes.
you have any practical application about ways that people can build their resiliency muscle, things that do work?
Actually, I have a lovely thing that I use a lot that I think of as resilience triage. So, this is something that anyone can apply in a moment of stress. I love to say when your body constricts, the cue for putting this into place is actually a message from your own body. So, something happens, and part of your whole system and your body, they just get smaller and constricted. And at that point, there are three questions that you can ask that are beautifully impactful, and they are impactful before you even take the next action. So the first question that I love and that's universally true, how can I or we add or build space into this situation? Where are things too tight, too fast, too short, too limited? Where can we add expansion and the experience of space, even if it's not actual real space? So you slow down just a little bit, you add breadth, you add buffer zones into anything. And at that point, you start to experience the whole thing differently, even just by asking that question. The second question is, how can I add health into the system? What is the actual system or systems involved? Can we add health into any of these systems so that they are naturally going to progress forward more beautifully, more elegantly, more cleanly? And that could be something as straightforward as saying, okay, the system I've got right now is a 4-year-old in a meltdown. Let's add health into this system by upping the blood sugar and adding a nap. Or you have a company that is spending a lot of money on bringing in trust exercise consultants. And you can say, hey, you know what? This system For example, your policies are destroying health even as you're paying to have it brought back in. So, how can we add clarity into your policies so that you have a system that supports more candor, more transparency, and therefore more innovation? The last one is how can we add lightness? Where are things heavy? Where are things too serious? Where is their ego? How can we add lightness? Do I tell a joke? Do I offer to carry your bags? One of the reasons why all of this works is by asking these questions, we have shifted the attention from what the circumstances are doing to you to where can I be in action? What can I let go? What can I feed and nurture? And that agency, that claiming of agency is a beautiful nurturer, natural nurturer of resilience in any moment or relationship.
So it sounds like resiliency is very reactive in that it's based on a crisis or a trauma or a circumstance that's
Mhm.
happened that we're reacting to. Let's talk a little bit about being proactive because your
Mhm.
body of work also focuses on burnout, which really seems to be a recurring theme that's surfacing more and more. What does burnout look like? And Lorca, how do we prevent it?
It's interesting. I think that there has come to be what I think of as the two sides of what I do. And all the names that I use are kind of placeholders. So resilience is kind of the best name I've got for it. The other side of the coin, oddly enough, has turned out to be leadership. And the reason for that is over the years, I have these things that I work with and that I teach. And so I can have people coming to me through different doorways. And if someone is below the line of well being, the word resilience resonates. And they are very clear about how important it is. And they say, you give me tools so that I can change how I am in my world moving forward. And in working with these tools, they raise themselves up back until they're above that line of well being. Above the line of well being, something flips, which is that I have other people who come to me and they say, Lorca, I'm about to take on something huge. I'm going to start a foundation. I'm going to go up against something hard. I'm going to adopt 4 children. Something. So I need more resources than I currently have if I'm going to design for not burning out down the road. Because otherwise, I'm kind of designing for it. The resources I currently am planning to use are great for what I've done so far, not necessarily enough for where I'm headed. So those people are often fine, but those exact same tools that build us up from inside and invite us to change our relationship with the world that we live in, those give energy, they give clarity, they make people magnetic, they make people harder to manipulate, and they feed these fountains of life that come up inside them. And that description right there sounds like the opposite of burnout. Someone who has a persistent fountain inside them, one of the primary indicator species of a resilient human is persistent joy. All of that to say that my work as a body and this whole thing that given myself into the hands of to play with is not reactive, except in those situations where someone hands me a thing that needs responding to. I really hold resilience for myself and for everyone as preemptive, that we make ourselves burnout resistant. I've never ever felt that I am immune from something as bad as I experienced when I was 16 happening again tomorrow. What I do know is that who it happens to is very different now. This was the promise I made to myself. Not that I would be perfectly protected, but that I would be as beautifully prepared to meet absolutely anything. And I would even say it's not just the negative things. Extraordinarily magical, beautiful, big things that we want and that we give ourselves into and that we invite and hope happen. Those are hard too. That's stressful and it's hard for some of us to say yes to beautiful things. And I want to be as open to those things as to anything else. So this is meeting my promise.
You're talking about two sides of the coin, which really equals a whole. And you have noted that you architect wholeness. What do you mean by architecting wholeness? And is this something that we all can learn to do or a way that we all can learn to be?
Yes, I completely believe that. Yes. And the extent to which we are not whole is the extent to which we numb, the extent to which we are not whole, we have the need to be proving something, and the extent to which we are not whole, we hurt others or pull away from them, and we diminish our capacity to complete what we are uniquely suited to do in the world. I had a moment yesterday where I was driving with my son, and we had a 5-minute drive to get somewhere. And there was this combination, as is not necessarily uncommon for someone with children and a farm and languages and all these things. Anyway, there was a certain amount of circus happening. Basically, I would just say it was an experience of just goofy love for the weirdness, the drama that was showing up, the humans that were all around me, the place that I live in. And it wasn't just, oh, I feel good because this is such a great moment, right? Or a great thing happening in the world right now, or I'm so happy for an accomplishment. It was a holding of all the weirdness in a bowl in cupped hands and feeling more than I ever feel when I feel just goodness. And if we want to live every day of our lives, we need to know how to speak to our minds. They're not necessarily always on our side. We need to know how to speak to our bodies and listen to what they say back. We need to have a common language with our own nervous system so that we can navigate that unique relationship and be able to embrace the unreasonable astonishment of being alive. I think I would have said, if you had asked me any time in the last, what, almost 40 years now, if you had asked me, Lorca, your sense of mortality, your sense that you are lucky to be on the planet, that I would be able at some point to start to relax into and accept and take for granted again that I'm still here. I don't think it's gone away. On some level, it has never gone away. I feel such delight every time I meet someone's eyes. I'm like, I'm here, you're here. And I know that it's not a morbid thing. I know that it is part of what I bring people back into a sense of just by the being together. And then they work from that.
Let's chat about this idea of being together, about meeting someone where they're at, about connecting through someone's eyes. You have a couple of special projects that
Mhm.
you've launched, one being the Being With project, and the other is the Human Gaze project. Tell us about these. What prompted your desire to launch these initiatives and what impact are they having?
These grew from a number of different impulses, I would say. They were micro prompts that kept coming in from different directions. And one of them was when I was teaching up in the Human Leadership Development Program. I taught resilient leadership up at Montana State University. And I would invite them into situations which were more and less comfortable depending on the person. And one of the situations was that very simple invitation to face someone else and without speaking to meet their gaze for a predetermined amount of time, just to be with. I know that this is actually something that I believe probably half the population, this is actually not something that really is good for them. It's not something they naturally want. It doesn't make them feel better. Trying it on can be, I think, useful for them just because it's useful to know where your own wildernesses are, right? But at the same time, I think the Human Gaze Project and my own personal version of that, which is called 10,000 Gazes, is one avenue of starting to be with and question and invite ourselves into being with as a muscle, as a human capacity that we can improve in, right? That we can strengthen. And as far as the impact of it and the reason for it, can look at vast amounts of what's happening in the news today. And I can see so clearly where these things are showing up as a failure to be with, that there is so much reactivity in a particular encounter, whether it's an encounter with another person or an encounter with another political party or an encounter with a person of a different gender or a different practices or of different age or faith or an idea. Let's say, for example, that someone had the ability to encounter something that made them uncomfortable or someone that made them uncomfortable, and both of them just stayed. They just stayed a little longer, a little bit longer, a bit of a pause. And when I say a little bit longer, I'm almost talking about 30 seconds. 3 minutes. And just sitting with yourself, sitting with the fact that another human exists who is different, that things matter to them, that they love, that they care, that they're afraid. If I can think of the person who is the most triggering to me, and I think about just holding on just a little bit longer before I react and inviting in a greater wholeness that allows me to hold them, that allows me to hold us as coexisting in the world, then outcomes change. And what's been fascinating to me in terms of specific results of this is number one, I was a little worried, obviously, when I started doing this in public. I set up these invitations out in public, whether I'm using signs or a button on my shirt or whatever, saying, sit quietly with me. Will you meet my gaze for 90 seconds? And I had to ask myself before I started it, hey, are you ready to handle adverse results to your to this invitation? Are you ready to handle aggression? Are you ready to handle mental illness? Are you ready to handle, someone who just wants to like cause a reaction in me? Are you ready to handle any and all of this? And I thought about it and I was like, yes, I'm ready. And I talked to a few friends who are in these arenas. And the way I've done it so far is when someone stands or sits opposite me and we meet each other's gaze quietly, or in some cases they say, can we just sit together and I don't stare into your face because that makes me upset. And I'm like, sure, right? We just have to be together. And then when they're done, I say, would you just write me a quick note about your experience? So I have all this growing stack of 4x6 note cards. I started doing this before COVID and then that got put on hold because it's closer than 6 feet. In the months that I've restarted doing it and the cards are stacking up, I have a 0% negative reaction. Not a single negative reaction. Not a single one. I've done this in the public library, which in Bozeman is 8 degrees, and there's a pretty large homeless population there, and they don't sit down with me, but some of them give me fist bumps. So, I've been astonished because I have had people say, "Nope, never could do that," and like, "No, go," but when it comes to, anyone doing it, I've had people ask me, "Could I do this with my family?" And I say, "Yeah, you can ask them." I've had people write a poem and leave it. I've had people from everything from 2 9-year-olds who sat opposite me to 77-year-olds. There is a hunger in people for quiet being with.
Which really to me, Lorca, seems astonishing because we don't live in a patient culture. We live with social media and with a need for immediate feedback.
Mhm.
So, this idea that you're exploring seems very radical.
I hope it does feel radical. The 10,000 gazes was me meeting that radical thing because even when I started doing it, at some point I thought, Lorca, you are not going to come out of this the same person. And I thought, what do you want? Do you want to do 100? Do you want to do 1,000? I never want to stop. And who it makes me meeting these people's gazes, watching myself and my mind go through all these different permutations when I'm sitting opposite someone. And then the verbalization of their process in what is for some people a radically new experience. They say, I've never done this before. And they say, at first I was self-conscious. And then they might say, oh, and then I got really curious about you. And then I was thinking about my grandma. And then everything went away and I just was sitting with you. I had a note that said, this is the second time that someone has ever seen me. So some of these are heartbreaking. There are needs not being met. And if we look at loneliness as a pandemic and having people not have a sense of belonging as a pandemic, if we look at radicalization of young people, young men especially, right? Then being with is also the remedy. And if we build this muscle in ourselves and stretch ourselves and find out where our actual boundaries are, that's beautiful for us to know. And then we can start titrating in and out of those places and expanding ourselves. And the world cannot be the same when people do this. And this is a radical act of revolution to make yourself unmanipulable.
When we think about self reflection and the reflection that something like this takes, let's think about your journey to getting here. If there's one thing that you wish that you had known when you started your journey of approaching things with curiosity, what
Mhm.
would it be?
Anyone coming out of a dark place, I think we go through various spirals of growth into who we are now. And we can start in a cycle of being a victim of the thing. That happened to me. I have to just accept it. It's affected me and I don't even know how. I went through a stage where I thought, I'm not a victim anymore. I'm healing. And I feel like I'm going to call myself a survivor. Like I survived that thing. I'm a survivor of it. And I went through another phase which said, I don't even want to be in reference to it. I just want to be Lorca. And so I'm just going to be Lorca for a while. That was really great too. But as the further I stepped into owning all of the parts of myself, all of it had to be invited back in. I don't think that that spiral progression I just described is an unhealthy one. I believe probably a lot of people go through it. I actually believe that if you keep adding health, the last stage of that progression is leadership, like a radiant kind of leadership. Because if we've gone through something hard, we have a real clarity about what's not important. We are some of the world's treasures, not because of the normal things, but because of that clarity. And it's hard to have a big ego as you keep adding health and the uplifting of others. I did go through a pretty hard period of feeling like I needed to justify having survived by living really hard, by pushing myself and somehow proving that I wasn't wasting this second chance that I'd been given. It's a great restfulness to be coming out of that, even though I think it still shows up once in a while. At the very ground of all of this work is compassion, like a warrior's compassion, where you hold all the things. You hold all of yourself with a deep self honoring. And self honoring, I believe, is at the heart of preventing burnout and preventing making choices that won't serve us or the world. And that can include setting boundaries, it can include listening to more parts of ourselves than we have been, checking for which part of our inner council has been getting stifled and trying to listen to more of ourselves, because a friend or a child who is beautifully honored is going to thrive. When we honor ourselves and our needs and where we are really right now and those needs, then we are going to feel and see that same thriving, not only in ourselves, but in everything that we touch and everyone. That's not worth nothing. That's amazing.
As you've navigated your own challenges, and it sounds like one of the biggest one, as you just shared, was proving that you were deserving of this second chance. How have you approached seeking assistance or
Mm.
seeking help to overcome and navigate the obstacles in front of you?
I'm going to have to say loving and being loved. I think that when you allow yourself or invite yourself to repeatedly love, and when you allow yourself to be loved, that question tends to dissolve some. It's a natural part of the give and take of support so that we don't have to force accepting help. One of the oddest lessons that I learned from the unusual situation that I found myself in was I thought when it all first happened that the people I was closest to who I lost would be the ones that I would grieve the hardest and the longest. And it didn't happen. What happened was there were students that I knew and had done things with, but that I didn't know them as well. They were a year younger than me. And then there was my advisor, the head of my dorm, one of my climbing team members, and another friend. And what I found as a few years went on, that the people that I loved the most, the grief passed the soonest and the cleanest. It's not that they're any less with me, but I noticed that when I thought of them, what came was love. And I would think of Frederick Tom and I just have a wave of love. And I miss him. And I wish I could talk about this thing with him or show this thing. But I felt love. Or when I thought of Susan. And it was the other people who I didn't know as well that the thorns stayed in tighter in my heart. And I thought, wow, if this is true, then we have to go against the grain of what may be instinctive for us as humans and love everybody as hard as we can. And that may be the best protection we have against the astonishing loss of grief and death and mortality. I'm still testing that one, but I do believe it's true.
So, Lorca, when you consider your legacy and the impact that you desire to have, What does this look like? Do you have a big vision? And what's next for you?
I think that resilience wants to be in control of the world. I think that life, that nature, that those as forces in the world, they are irresistible and they will win in the end, whether humans are around or not. And that resilience is all part of that life force. And I end up feeling like a voice for it and a power tool in its hands, basically. And so it wants to be out everywhere. It wants to be in everyone's hands. And the more resilient humans there are, the less violence there is, the more art there is, the more caring and beautiful systems there are, the more intelligent use of resources we have, and the more justice, and the more people see each other. And all of these things are deeply interrelated. I want the resilience work that I do to be existing as fully cross borders and border dissolving. And I want it to be creating strange bedfellows and having those strange bedfellows persisting through time. Functionally speaking, when you build resilience into an organization, then where a place where you add health is a mess that you don't need to clean up. It does twice the work. It adds health and it prevents future things from happening, which then you're going to have to pour more resources into. So you can heal what hasn't yet happened. And that to me is the most intelligent design that we can possibly put into place. And so I want that in place in our prison systems. And so I'm working on that. And I want that in place in our young women entrepreneurs. And so I'm working with that. And I want it in place with activists who are facilitating justice. So wherever I see these invitations to me, I am in.
Your life's work is weighty, but clearly you are fueled by passion, energy, and as you've already said, love. What words of wisdom would you give to someone who's experienced trauma or crisis and is stuck?
It's always worth remembering that healing is iterative, that you don't need to hunt for the silver bullet. For me, it was starting small, looking for things that made a difference, letting me feel just a little bit better, a little bit more whole, looking for these bubbles of normalcy and bubbles and these little windows that I could see myself again as someone who was living a life that I wanted to, and that I wasn't carrying along this whole additional piece that was taking so much from me as well. Holding ourselves with this real warrior's compassion, which says, don't never give up acknowledging that there is suffering in yourself. Allowing yourself to say always, that hurts. That's real. We don't deny that. And then the second place we can take ourselves is not only is it real that it hurts, but this is so human. Holding on to the common humanity so that we don't isolate ourselves in a sense of strangeness or weirdness or aloneness while we're hurting, because that is so easy to do and so normal. And then thirdly, to close out that cycle, add kindness. Add kindness into yourself. Give kindness to someone else. Large, small, really decisive or accumulative. And by holding ourselves in all of our pieces without shaming ourselves for these moments of joy that come even while we're still in deep grief, because that's real too. And these bubbles of normalcy and these bubbles of agency grow as we keep continuing to add health back into the systems that we are, these ecosystems that we are. And we add health back in out of love for ourselves, love for everyone around us, and love for our world.
Okay, Lorca, I have one last question. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would like to share?
I think I would love to just shine a light on the incredible power and effectiveness of a feeling that shows up for me as a combination of amazement and joy. Amazement for me is very significant when it comes to being resilient because my experience of depression showed up as I am not amazed by anything and I don't think I'm ever going to be amazed again. That's how it felt to me. And so having come out of there, I have worked to develop a hair trigger amazement reflex. At the drop of a pin, I can look around me at anything or anyone and blow myself away with something, right? Be utterly astonished, and my world gets bigger. And I am confronted with what I don't even know. Like, oh, I just got amazed by that. And what else? Someone who is in that place is contributing to the world in ways they don't even know. They are so fiercely alive and humble and curious and very likely to come up with new ideas. That can also be used as a metric for resilience in a person or in an organization. And if I have someone in an organization telling me how resilient they are and there's no joy in the hallways ever, then I get really curious. And if we start tracking joy that occurs very often internally, regardless, independently of circumstances, the more that shows up, the more you know you're on the right track. And if that were being measured along with GDP, very, very different planet.
Thank you, Lorca, for helping us understand the importance of designed resilience and sharing your knowledge, your love, and your light with all of us so we can feel astonished and amazed in our own worlds. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about Lorca's work or connect with her directly, I've included a link to her website in the show notes. So be sure to share this episode of the Two Gals and a Mic podcast with someone who is seeking to know what it looks like to be powerfully resilient. And then tune in again next week as I chat with another amazing woman doing amazing things. I'll see you then.